The dust hadn't settled in 3,000 years. Dr. Vexnall watched it dance in the beam of his portable light, 6 limbs trembling with excitement. His team had been digging on Kepler 442b for 8 months, and this was the moment he'd been waiting for. "Careful with that seal," he called out to his assistant, a young Pleiadian named Sira. Her 3 eyes blinked in sequence as she worked the cutting laser around the ancient door. "If we break the atmospheric seal, we could damage whatever is inside." The mining colony above them had been empty since the first expansion era. Humans had lived here once, then abandoned it in a hurry. No one knew why. The records were lost or corrupted. All that remained were empty buildings and questions. Vexnall had made his career studying those questions. He was one of the galaxy's top xenoarchaeologists, specializing in early human settlements. Humans were strange enough in the present day. Understanding their past was like solving a puzzle where half the pieces were missing and the other half didn't make sense. The seal broke with a hiss. Stale air rushed out carrying the scent of metal and time. Vexnall's breathing tubes filtered it automatically, analyzing the composition. Normal atmosphere, just old, very old. "We're through, Doctor," Sira announced. Vexnall moved forward, his lower arms steadying himself against the tunnel walls, while his upper arms held scanning equipment. The door slid open, grinding against ancient tracks. His light pierced the darkness beyond. Then he stopped. All 6 limbs locked in place. "By the first stars," he whispered. The chamber stretched before him, far larger than their scans had suggested, and it was full. Row after row of metal objects lined the walls, hung from racks, stood in neat formations on the floor. Thousands of them. Maybe tens of thousands. "What are they?" Sira asked, moving up beside him. Vexnall approached the nearest rack slowly. The objects were identical, or nearly so. Each was a blade of some kind about as long as his forearm, short by most standards. The metal was dark with age, but still solid. Still sharp. He activated his scanner. The readings made him frown. "Iron-carbon alloy, very simple composition, crude even." "That can't be right," Sira said. "Humans had plasma weapons during the first expansion. They had mass drivers. Why would they store primitive metal blades?" Vexnall picked one up carefully. It was heavier than he expected. The blade was straight and double-edged, tapering to a wicked point. A crossguard separated the blade from a handle wrapped in some kind of rotted leather. The balance was perfect, designed for a human hand. "Look at this," he said, turning it over. Symbols were etched into the base of the blade. Not standard human script from that era, something older, much older. He photographed the markings and ran them through the translation database. No match. "Send these images to the Galactic Archaeological Council," he instructed, "and to the Linguistics Department at New Terra University. I want to know what these symbols mean." Over the next few hours, they cataloged the chamber. Every blade was the same design. Every blade had similar markings. The room itself was climate-controlled, or had been once. The environmental systems had failed centuries ago, but the blades remained in perfect condition, protected by the sealed chamber. "Doctor, there's something else," called out Jix, a Crovar technician working near the back wall. Vexnall hurried over. Jix pointed to a panel on the wall. Human text, this time in standard colony script. Vexnall read it aloud. "Property of the Kepler 442b Historical Earth Warfare Society, Greco-Roman Period Collection. Handle with respect." "Historical warfare?" Sira's voice was confused. "They kept weapons for history?" Vexnall felt a chill run through his body. Humans were the only species he knew that studied war as a historical subject. Most civilized species had 1 or 2 conflicts in their past, brief and regrettable. They moved on quickly, preferring not to remember those dark times. But humans? Humans built museums for war. They wrote books about battles. They seemed almost proud of their violent history. He set the blade down carefully on a scanning platform. "Run a full analysis. I want to know everything about these weapons, how old the design is, how they were made, how they were used." The results came back an hour later. Vexenal read them 3 times, certain there was a mistake. The design was over 5,000 years old. From Earth itself, humanity's homeworld. The blades were replicas, made about 3,000 years ago using ancient techniques. But the design was from an era when humans hadn't even reached their own moon. "Why?" Vexenal asked the empty air. "Why would you travel between stars and still make weapons from your Stone Age?" "Bronze Age, actually," Jix corrected, reading from his datapad. "Iron Age, to be specific. The carbon analysis suggests these were made using historical forging methods. Someone went to a lot of trouble to recreate ancient human weapons." Vexenal contacted the Galactic Archaeological Council that evening. Within 2 days, the chamber was the talk of the academic community. Within 4 days, it was galactic news. The theories started immediately. Some said the humans had been preparing for war, stockpiling primitive weapons that couldn't be detected by modern sensors. Others claimed it was a religious site, a temple to some forgotten human war god. A few suggested the humans had been regressing, losing their technology and falling back into barbarism before they abandoned the colony. Commander Thakal arrived on the 5th day. The Krovar was a military advisor to the council, a veteran of the Rim Wars and an expert on weapons technology. He was massive, even for his species, with thick armor plating and eyes that missed nothing. He picked up one of the blades, testing its weight and balance. "Efficient design," he rumbled. "Close quarters. For stabbing primarily, but the edges are sharp enough for slashing. Designed to kill other humans." "How can you tell?" Vexenal asked. Thakal pointed to the blade's length and width. "Too short for hunting large game. Too heavy for precision cutting. The point is angled for penetrating armor. Primitive armor, probably leather or basic metal. This is a weapon of war, Doctor. No question about it." Vexenal's breathing tubes fluttered anxiously. "But why so many? And why keep them?" "That," Thakal said, setting the blade down, "is what concerns me. We need an expert on human history. Real human history, not just the colonization period." The council agreed. They sent a message to Dr. Sarah Chen, a human archaeologist 3-star systems away. She specialized in what humans called Old Earth history, the thousands of years before spaceflight. While they waited for her arrival, Vexenal couldn't stop thinking about the chamber. He'd spent years studying humans, working alongside them, even calling some of them friends. But this discovery reminded him of a fundamental truth he sometimes forgot. Humans were different, very different, and understanding them meant understanding a history of violence that most species couldn't imagine. The blade sat on his desk in the temporary lab, dark and cold, and waiting. Waiting for someone who could explain what it really meant. Dr. Sarah Chen stepped off the transport ship, looking tired and annoyed. She'd been in the middle of excavating a site on Proxima Centauri b when the council's urgent summons arrived. The message had been dramatic, almost panicked. "Critical discovery requires immediate human expertise, possible proto-human death cult artifacts, extreme priority." She dropped her bags in the temporary housing unit and headed straight to the lab. Whatever had the council so worried couldn't wait for her to settle in. Vexenal met her at the entrance, his 6 limbs moving in what she recognized as agitated excitement. They'd worked together before on a dig on New Terra. He was thorough, careful, and sometimes overly cautious. Seeing him this worked up was unusual. "Dr. Chen, thank goodness you're here," he said, ushering her inside. "The council has been debating for 3 days. We need your expertise." The lab was crowded. She recognized several council members, including the stern-faced Luminari representative who always looked like he'd smelled something bad. Commander Thakal stood near the back, his massive frame making the other aliens look small. In the center of the room, displayed on illuminated tables, were rows of swords. Sarah stopped, blinked, looked again. "You called me here for 3 days of faster-than-light travel because you found swords." Vexnal's translator chip struggled with her tone. "These artifacts are causing significant concern. The design is extremely old, yet thousands were stored here. The purpose is unclear. The ritual significance is..." "Ritual significance?" Sarah walked to the nearest table and picked up one of the blades. The weight was familiar, comfortable. "Who told you these were ritual objects?" A Luminari scholar stepped forward, his crystalline body refracting the lab lights. "We have analyzed the cache thoroughly, Dr. Chen. The sheer number of identical weapons, the careful preservation, the ancient design, all evidence points to a religious or ceremonial purpose. Possibly a warrior-priest cult. The violence implicit in the design is disturbing." Sarah turned the blade over in her hands, examining the markings. A maker's stamp caught her eye, small and precise. She recognized the pattern immediately. She started laughing. The room went silent. Every alien in the lab stared at her. Vexnal's breathing tubes fluttered in confusion. Commander Thakal's eyes narrowed. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, trying to control herself. "I'm sorry, but this is hilarious. You thought these were death cult artifacts?" "The evidence suggests..." the Luminari began. "These are toys," Sarah interrupted. She held up the blade. "Well, not toys exactly. Reproductions, historical reenactment pieces. See this mark?" She pointed to the stamp. "That's from Santiago Arms, a company that made replica weapons for historical societies. They were based on Mars." Vexnal moved closer. "Replicas of what?" "This is a gladius, a Roman short sword, used by the Roman Empire about 3,000 years before we left Earth." She set it down and picked up another, examining it with practiced ease. "This is a good reproduction, too. Proper steel. Correct dimensions, even the right weight distribution." "Roman Empire?" Vexnal's translator struggled with the term. "We have no records of this civilization." Sarah sighed. This was going to take a while. "Let me back up. You know humans had civilizations on Earth for thousands of years before spaceflight, right?" Heads nodded around the room. "Well, we had a lot of civilizations. Different cultures, different eras. The Romans were one of them, existed about 2,000 years before we left Earth. They built a massive empire, conquered most of Europe, parts of Africa and Asia. And their soldiers used these." She hefted the Gladius. "Short, practical, designed for close formation fighting, incredibly effective." "But why recreate them?" Vexnal asked. "You had advanced weapons during the first expansion. Plasma rifles, rail guns, smart munitions. Why make primitive metal blades?" "For fun," Sarah said simply. The room erupted. Several aliens started talking at once. The Luminary representative's color shifted to an alarmed orange. Commander Thakal remained still, but she could see interest in his eyes. Vexnal held up his upper arms for silence. "Dr. Chen, please explain. How is creating weapons fun?" Sarah pulled up her datapad and projected a hologram. Images filled the air above the tables. Roman legions marching in formation. Soldiers in armor, shields locked. Gladi held ready. "Human history is full of warfare," she began. "We fought each other for thousands of years. Different kingdoms, different empires, different ideologies. Before we reached the stars, war was a constant part of human civilization." She changed the image. Medieval knights on horseback. Samurai warriors with curved swords. Napoleonic soldiers with muskets. Each era had different weapons, different tactics, different styles of warfare, And we remember them. We study them. Some humans find this history fascinating, so they recreate it. Historical reenactment societies would make accurate replicas of ancient weapons and armor, then practice with them. Sometimes they'd stage mock battles following historical tactics. You fought each other for entertainment? The luminary sounded horrified. No, not real fighting, like theater, performance, education. Sarah could see she was losing them. Look, we also had Olympics, sports competitions. Fencing is still an Olympic sport. Sword fighting with safety rules. It's not about hurting anyone. It's about remembering where we came from. Commander Thakal spoke for the first time. Your species trained with ancient weapons voluntarily? For no military purpose? That's right. Show me. Sarah hesitated. I'm not an expert, but I did some HEMA, historical European martial arts, in college. She picked up the Gladius again, testing its balance. The basic principle of the Gladius was simplicity and discipline. Roman soldiers fought in formations, shields overlapping. The Gladius was for stabbing between the shields. She demonstrated the stance, showing how the short blade allowed for quick thrusts while staying protected behind a shield. The movements were economical, efficient, brutal in their purpose. The Khal watched intently. That technique would be lethal against unarmored opponents. It was, Sarah said quietly. The Romans conquered most of the known world with these. Well, the known world from their perspective. She set the blade down. But here's the thing you need to understand. The historical Earth Warfare Society that owned these blades, they weren't preparing for war, they were remembering it. There's a difference. I don't understand the distinction, Vexnal said. Sarah chose her words carefully. Most species in the galaxy had 1 or 2 wars in their history, right? Brief conflicts, then you achieved peace and moved on. You don't talk about it much, you don't study it. You certainly don't recreate it. Nods around the room. Humans are different. We had thousands of years of almost constant warfare. It shaped our cultures, our technologies, our entire development. We can't just forget that. So we study it, preserve it, sometimes even recreate it. Not because we want to fight again, but because forgetting our violent past would be dangerous. How is remembering violence less dangerous than forgetting it? The Luminari asked. Because if we forget how to fight, we forget why peace matters, Sarah said. These blades aren't religious artifacts. They're reminders, lessons in metal. The room was quiet. Sarah could see the aliens processing this, trying to understand a mindset so foreign to their own. Commander Thakal broke the silence. How many different weapon types did humans create throughout history? Sarah laughed weakly. Thousands. Tens of thousands if you count variations. Swords, spears, bows, crossbows, guns, cannons, bombs. We got very creative at killing each other. And you preserve all of these? Museums full of them. Historical societies dedicated to each era. Books, videos, virtual reconstructions. If it was used in human history, someone somewhere has studied it and probably recreated it. She looked around the room at the shocked alien faces. I know how this sounds. I know how it makes us look. But understanding human history means understanding this truth. We were violent. We were very, very good at violence. And we chose to stop. That choice matters. Vexnal was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, What do the symbols on the blade mean? The markings we couldn't translate? Sarah examined them again. Latin, ancient Roman language. This one says, it's a serial number actually, and a motto. Discipline and strength. Pretty standard for military equipment. You can read dead languages? Latin isn't completely dead. Scholars still study it, and some phrases are still used. She smiled slightly. It's part of remembering. The meeting continued for another hour, But Sarah could see the mood had shifted. Fear was giving way to confusion, confusion to reluctant curiosity. These aliens were trying to understand a species that cataloged its own capacity for destruction. As the room emptied, Commander Thakal approached her. "Your demonstration was instructive, Dr. Chen. I would like to learn more about human warfare history." "Why?" Sarah asked, suddenly wary. "Because any species that survived itself deserves respect," the Crovar said simply. "And perhaps study." After he left, Sarah stood alone with the blades. She thought about the humans who'd lived on this colony, who'd carefully stored these reproductions, who'd practiced with them and studied them. They'd been light years from Earth, building a new world, and still they'd carried their history with them. She understood why. You couldn't run from what you were. You could only choose what to become. Outside, she could hear Vexnal making calls to the council, updating them on the findings. She wondered how the galaxy would react when the news spread. Humans, with their museums of warfare. Humans who practiced with ancient weapons for fun. Humans who couldn't forget how to fight even when they'd chosen peace. The galaxy was about to learn something new about humanity. Sarah just hoped they'd understand. The next morning, Sarah found Vexnal and his team already in the lab. They'd been working through the night, cataloging the chamber's contents. And they'd found more. "Dr. Chen," Vexnal said, his voice tight with stress, "we've discovered additional storage rooms. The Gladius cache was only the beginning." Sarah followed him through the underground complex. They passed through 3 more sealed doors, each opening onto chambers filled with weapons. The first room held long, curved swords mounted on wall displays. Sarah recognized them immediately. Katanas? Japanese. From about the same Earth era as the Gladius, maybe a bit later. The second room was filled with axes, large double-bladed axes with long handles. "Viking," Sarah muttered. "Northern European culture, warriors and sailors." The third room made her stop and stare. Bows. Hundreds of longbows, each taller than she was, with bundles of arrows stacked in careful rows. English longbows, medieval period. These could punch through armor at 200 meters. "We've also found firearms," Vexnal said quietly. "Primitive chemical propellant weapons, and spears. Thousands of spears." Sarah ran her hand through her hair. "How many rooms are there?" "We've mapped 17 so far. We think there might be more." She thought about the implications. "Vex, this wasn't just a historical society. This was a museum, a complete collection of human warfare through the ages." "That's what concerns us," he said. "Why would colonists building a new world bring all of this with them?" Sarah didn't have a good answer. They returned to the main lab where she pulled up her datapad and started creating a presentation. If the aliens wanted to understand, she'd have to give them the full picture. The team assembled an hour later. Council members attended via hologram, their images flickering in the air. Commander Thakal was there in person, along with several other military advisors from different species. Sarah began. "You asked why humans preserve weapons. To answer that, you need to understand human history, not just the highlights, the whole story." She pulled up a timeline, stretching back thousands of years. "Humans evolved on Earth about 300,000 years ago. We've been fighting each other for most of that time." The first image showed primitive stone tools. "These are hand axes, 50,000 years old, probably used for hunting, but also effective as weapons. Humans have always made tools that could hurt or kill." She moved through the timeline: bronze swords from ancient Egypt, iron weapons from China, steel blades from Europe. Each era brought new materials, new designs, new ways to fight. "The Gladius represents a specific point in our development," she explained. "The Roman Empire lasted about 500 years. At its height, it controlled most of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. They did this with discipline, organization, and weapons like the Gladius. She showed images of Roman soldiers in formation, their shields locked together, creating a wall of metal and leather. The Gladius worked because of tactics. Individual soldiers were trained to fight as a unit. The sword was designed for that style of warfare. "But you moved beyond swords," Vexanal said. "You developed more advanced weapons." "Oh, yes." Sarah pulled up new images: crossbows, cannons, muskets, rifles, machine guns. "We got very good at killing from a distance." Each innovation made warfare more deadly, more efficient. She paused. "The thing is, we didn't just use these weapons once and move on. We used them for centuries. The sword was a primary weapon for over 3,000 years. Bows were used for even longer. Guns have been around for about 1,000 years, and we still use them." Commander Thakal leaned forward. "Your timeline shows continuous warfare. Not isolated conflicts, but constant fighting across your entire civilization." "That's right," Sarah said. "At any given point in human history, someone somewhere was at war. Different kingdoms, different empires, different nations. We fought over territory, resources, religion, ideology. Sometimes we fought just because we were good at it." The aliens in the room shifted uncomfortably. This was beyond their experience. Sarah continued. "But here's what you need to understand. Each of these conflicts taught us something. The Romans learned that discipline and organization could overcome larger forces. Medieval knights developed codes of honor and chivalry. Asian warrior cultures created philosophies around combat. We didn't just fight. We thought deeply about fighting." She pulled up images of texts. Sun Tzu's The Art of War, written 2,500 years ago. Still studied today, not just by military leaders, but by business people, politicians, anyone interested in strategy. Miyamoto Musashi's Book of Five Rings, a manual on sword fighting that became a guide for living. "You turned warfare into philosophy?" a Pleiadian council member asked, her three eyes wide with disbelief. "We turned everything into philosophy," Sarah said, "including warfare. Because we did it so much, we had to find meaning in it." She changed the display to show historical reenactments. Humans in Roman armor, marching in formation. Others dressed as medieval knights, practicing with swords. Groups in samurai gear, moving through kata with precise movements. "These are modern humans," she explained, "living in times of peace. But they study these ancient techniques, practice these old fighting styles, not to prepare for war, but to connect with their history." "That's what the Historical Earth Warfare Society was doing," Vexnal said, understanding dawning. "They were maintaining a connection to human history." "Exactly. When humans left Earth and spread to the stars, we brought our history with us. Some people collected art, some collected books. These colonists collected weapons and the knowledge of how to use them." Thakal spoke up. "I've been reviewing your military history. The scale is difficult to comprehend. Wars lasting decades, conflicts that killed millions, weapons that could destroy entire cities." He paused. "Yet your species survived and eventually achieved peace. How?" Sarah took a breath. This was the important part. "We learned. It took thousands of years and countless deaths, but we learned. We learned that cooperation was stronger than conflict, that building together achieved more than fighting apart, that peace was harder than war, but worth the effort." She pulled up images from human space exploration, the first moon landing, the Mars colonies, the generation ships that left Sol system. "By the time we reached the stars, we'd decided. No more wars among ourselves. We'd channel that competitive energy into exploration, discovery, building." "But you kept the weapons," the luminary representative said. "You preserved the tools of violence." "Because forgetting would be dangerous," Sarah said firmly. If we pretend we were never violent, we forget how to recognize violence. If we pretend war was easy to leave behind, we forget how hard peace is to maintain. These weapons are reminders, lessons. She gestured to the timeline still floating in the air. Every blade in that cache represents a choice we made. The choice to remember what we were, so we never forget what we could become again. The room was silent. Sarah could see the aliens processing this, trying to fit it into their understanding of civilization and progress. Finally, a Zephyrian scholar spoke. Most species achieve peace through evolution or circumstance. We simply stop fighting because we matured as a species. But humans, you chose peace despite every instinct, despite thousands of years of practice at war? That's right. The scholar paused. That's remarkable and terrifying. Both, Sarah agreed. We're both. The Khal stood. I have a request. I would like permission to study these weapons and the tactics associated with them. As a military scholar, this is an unprecedented opportunity. Several council members objected immediately. The Luminari representative was particularly vocal. Absolutely not. Spreading knowledge of human warfare techniques could be dangerous. We should seal this cache and restrict access. Why? Sarah asked. The knowledge exists, whether you study it or not. Restricting it won't make it go away. But making it available could inspire violence among other species, the Luminary argued. Sarah shook her head. You're missing the point. The weapons themselves aren't dangerous. The knowledge isn't dangerous. What's dangerous is not understanding why humans moved beyond them. Commander Thakal wants to study our history. Let him. Let anyone who wants to understand. You would teach other species human warfare? Vexnal asked. I would teach them why we stopped, Sarah corrected. The weapons are only half the story. The other half is why we put them down. The debate continued for hours. Sarah demonstrated more weapons, explained more history, answered endless questions. Some aliens were horrified. Others were fascinated. A few, like Thakal, seemed to respect what humanity had overcome. Late that night, after everyone else had left, Sarah stood alone in the Gladius room. She picked up one of the swords, feeling its weight, its balance. Somewhere in human history, a soldier had carried a blade like this into battle, had killed with it, had maybe died because of it. Now it sat in a chamber on a distant world, a remnant of a violent past preserved by people who'd chosen peace. She wondered what those ancient Romans would think if they could see this. Their weapons, their tactics, their entire way of life reduced to museum pieces. Would they see it as honor or as defeat? Maybe both, Sarah thought, like humanity itself, both fierce and gentle, both warrior and peacemaker. She set the Gladius down carefully and headed back to her quarters. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more debates, more aliens trying to understand what made humans tick. And Sarah would keep explaining, keep teaching, keep showing them that humanity's greatest strength wasn't the ability to fight. It was the ability to choose not to. The news leaked on the third day. Sarah wasn't surprised. Too many people had access to the discovery, too many council members eager to share what they'd learned. By morning, every news feed in the galaxy was running stories about the human weapon cache. The headlines were sensational. Humans hoarded thousands of ancient weapons. Death cult discovery on frontier world. Are humans preparing for war? Sarah sat in the cafeteria, watching news reports on her datapad while forcing down breakfast. The coverage ranged from curious to alarmed to outright fearful. One Pleiadian commentator suggested humans should be banned from frontier colonies until their violent tendencies can be properly assessed. Idiots, she muttered. Which ones? Vexnal slid into the seat across from her, carrying a container of nutrient solution. All of them. They're turning a historical collection into a conspiracy theory. Vexnal's breathing tubes fluttered. Can you blame them? Most species don't understand human history. They see thousands of weapons and draw conclusions. Sarah pushed her food around her plate. What conclusions are you drawing? He was quiet for a moment. I'm trying to understand. You said humans chose peace. But these weapons, they're preserved so carefully, maintained. The Historical Society had training manuals, practice schedules, detailed documentation. That's not just remembering. That's active preservation. You think we're planning something? No, Vexnal said quickly. No, I don't. But I'm trying to understand the distinction between remembering and preparing. To my species, they seem like the same thing. Sarah set down her fork. Okay, let me ask you something. Your people had a war, right? About 800 years ago? The border conflict. It lasted 3 years. We don't discuss it. Why not? Vexnal's skin changed color slightly, a sign of discomfort. It's shameful. We behaved poorly. Both sides did. Better to move forward than dwell on past mistakes. And has your species had any conflicts since then? Small disagreements. Nothing violent. We learned our lesson. Sarah nodded. That works for you. Your species had one war, learned from it, moved on. But humans had thousands of wars over thousands of years. We can't just not discuss it. Our entire civilization was shaped by conflict. Our languages, our cultures, our technologies, all of it influenced by warfare. She pulled up her datapad and showed him images. Modern human medicine? Half of it came from treating battlefield injuries. Navigation technology? Developed for naval warfare. Computer science? Started with code breaking during wars. Rocket science came from weapons programs. Violence created progress. Vexnal looked disturbed. More like violence forced innovation. When your survival depends on being better than your enemy, you innovate fast. Sarah switched to different images. But we also created art from war. Epic poems, symphonies, paintings. Some of humanity's greatest cultural works are about conflict. That seems contradictory. It is. That's what makes us human. We're contradictory. We can love peace and study war. We can hate violence and respect warriors. We can create beauty from tragedy. Commander Thakal entered the cafeteria, his heavy footsteps announcing his arrival. He carried a datapad and looked troubled. Dr. Chen, I need your help, he said without preamble. The Krovar High Command wants a full report on human combat capabilities. They've seen the news coverage and they're concerned. Concerned how? Sarah asked, though she could guess. They want to know if humans are a threat, if these weapons represent a hidden arsenal, if your species has been preparing for conflict while claiming to seek peace. Sarah felt her temper rising. That's ridiculous. Those are reproductions, historical artifacts. I know that, Thakal said. You know that. But the High Command sees a species that has spent thousands of years perfecting warfare, then spread across the galaxy claiming to want peace, while secretly maintaining knowledge of every weapon they ever created. It's not secret. We have museums, public museums. Anyone can go look at this stuff. But most species don't. Most species don't want to think about violence. Thakal sat down heavily. I've been reviewing human military history all night. The tactics, the strategies, the innovations. It's impressive and frightening. Your species developed warfare into a science. And then we stopped, Sarah said firmly. Did you? Or did you just pause? Thakal's eyes were serious. Dr. Chen, I respect what humanity has achieved. I respect the choice to seek peace. But I'm a military commander. I have to consider threats. And a species that spent 3,000 years mastering combat, that preserves that knowledge, that trains with ancient weapons for fun, that is a species that could return to warfare very easily. Sarah felt cold. You think we're a threat. I think you're capable of being a threat. There's a difference. The Khal pulled up his data pad. I've been running simulations. Human tactics applied to modern warfare. The results are concerning. Your species thinks about combat differently than others, more creatively, more ruthlessly. Because we've had practice, Sarah said bitterly. Exactly. And that practice doesn't disappear just because you've chosen peace. He looked at her directly. How did your species survive itself, Dr. Chen? Truly? Most violent species destroy themselves before reaching the stars, but humans made it. How? Sarah thought about it. Really thought about it. We got scared, she finally said. Scared? We invented nuclear weapons, bombs that could destroy entire cities. We built thousands of them, pointed them at each other, and suddenly we realized we could actually end everything, end all of humanity. That scared us enough to stop. She pulled up historical images. Mushroom clouds, destroyed cities, radiation victims. We came right to the edge. We had the weapons, we had the will, and we almost did it. Almost killed ourselves completely, and then we stepped back. We decided that no conflict was worth that price. The images hung in the air, stark and terrible. Vexnall looked away. Even Thakal seemed disturbed. That's when we started really choosing peace, Sarah continued. Not because we'd evolved beyond violence, not because we'd matured, but because we'd seen what we could do, and it terrified us. Every human alive carries that knowledge. We know what we're capable of, and we choose differently. But you still preserve the weapons, Vexnall said softly, because forgetting that fear would be dangerous. If we forget what we almost did, we might do it again. Sarah looked at both of them. The weapons in that cache aren't a threat. They're a warning. To us. A reminder of what we were and what we could still become if we're not careful. The Khal was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, would you be willing to present this to the Galactic Council? Officially? They want a hearing? Several species have requested one. The Luminari are pushing for restrictions on human expansion. Others want sanctions, monitoring, oversight. You need to explain this before fear takes over. Sarah felt exhausted. And if I can't make them understand? Then humanity faces serious political consequences. Possibly isolation from the galactic community. She thought about it. All those humans on frontier worlds, building new lives, trying to be part of the larger galaxy. All that could fall apart because some colonists had collected historical weapons. I'll do it, she said, but I need time to prepare, and I need full access to the cache. If I'm going to explain human history, I need examples. I can arrange that, Vexnall said. Over the next 2 days, Sarah prepared. She cataloged weapons, researched history, created presentations. Commander Thakal helped, offering a military perspective. Even Vexnall contributed, helping her understand what aspects of human culture most confused other species. They discovered more in the cache, armor from different eras, training manuals in multiple languages, even recordings of historical battles, carefully labeled and preserved. One recording caught Sarah's attention. It showed a reenactment of a Roman legion in full combat drill. The precision was remarkable. Soldiers moving as one, shields locked, gladii stabbing forward in perfect unison. The narrator explained the tactics, the training, the discipline required. They're performing, Sarah realized. This is theater. They're showing how it was done, preserving the technique, but no one's actually fighting. The distinction matters? Vexnall asked. It's everything. Look at their faces. They're having fun, learning, appreciating the history. That's not preparation for war. That's education. She added the recording to her presentation. The night before the council hearing, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong. The species that feared humans. the ones that might see any explanation as justification for restrictions. She walked through the weapon cache, running her hands over centuries of human innovation. Each blade, each bow, each gun represented someone's attempt to survive, to win, to overcome their enemies. But they also represented the choice to stop, the decision that came after, the moment when humans said enough and meant it. She picked up a Gladius, the same one she'd examined that first day. The metal was cold and dark and old, but it was just metal, just iron and carbon and time. It had no power except what humans gave it, and humans had chosen to give it none. "I hope I can make them understand," she whispered to the empty room. The blade had no answer. It just waited, silent and patient, like all the other weapons in the darkness. Tomorrow, Sarah would stand before the Galactic Council and try to explain what it meant to be human. What it meant to carry thousands of years of violence in your history and still choose peace. She just hoped it would be enough. The Galactic Council chamber was built to impress. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, while 47 species sat in tiered seating that formed a circle around the central speaking platform. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing translations and data feeds. The whole room hummed with the technology of 1,000 worlds. Sarah stood in the center, feeling very small and very human. The council speaker, a Zephyrian elder named Krixnal, called the session to order. His voice echoed through the chamber. "We are here to address concerns regarding the recent discovery on Kepler 442b. Dr. Sarah Chen, human archaeologist, will present her findings and respond to questions. Dr. Chen, you may begin." Sarah took a breath and activated her presentation. Images filled the air around her, weapons, battles, historical records. "Members of the council, thank you for this opportunity. I'm here to talk about human history. Not to defend it, but to explain it, because understanding where we come from is the only way to understand where we're going." She started with the basics: early humans, stone tools, survival in a harsh world. The aliens had heard this before, but she needed to build the foundation. "Humans evolved as predators," she said. "We hunted for food, defended ourselves from larger predators, competed with other human groups for resources. Violence was part of survival, but so was cooperation. We learned to work together, to share knowledge, to build communities." The images shifted: early civilizations, agriculture, cities. As we developed, our violence became more organized. We formed armies, developed tactics, created weapons specifically for fighting other humans. And we did this for thousands of years. She pulled up the timeline again, the one that showed continuous warfare throughout human history. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. "I know how this looks, but I ask you to consider something. Most species in this chamber achieved spaceflight within 500 years of developing advanced technology. Humans took over 1,000. Why? Because we kept fighting each other. Every generation, we spent resources on warfare instead of progress." A luminary council member interrupted. "That proves our point, Dr. Chen. Your species wasted time on violence, while more civilized species advanced peacefully." "Did they?" Sarah asked. She pulled up data on other species' development. The Pleiadians had one war, then immediate unity. The Zephyr achieved peace through biological imperatives. You literally cannot sustain violent thoughts for long periods. The Krovar had brief territorial conflicts before developing philosophy that ended warfare. She gestured to the assembled aliens. You all found peace easily because your biology or your circumstances made it easy. But humans? We had to choose it, had to fight for it, had to work at peace the same way we once worked at war. The images changed to show human conflicts through history, but this time, Sarah focused on what came after each war: treaties, organizations for peace, international agreements. Every major war taught us something. The Napoleonic Wars led to the concept of international law. The First World War created the League of Nations, an attempt at global cooperation. The Second World War and its nuclear horror created the United Nations and a commitment to avoiding global conflict. "But you kept building weapons," someone called out. "Yes, for a while. We're not perfect. We made mistakes, but look at the trend." She showed data spanning centuries, warfare gradually decreasing, international cooperation increasing, resources shifting from military to civilian purposes. By the time we reached the stars, we'd made a choice. No more wars among ourselves. All that competitive energy, all that innovation that came from conflict, we channeled it into exploration, discovery, building. She pulled up images of human space achievements, the Mars colonies, the generation ships, peaceful cooperation with the first alien species humanity encountered. The weapons in that cache on Kepler 442b? They're proof of that choice. The Historical Earth Warfare Society preserved them not as tools, but as lessons. They studied ancient combat techniques the way you might study ancient literature or art, as cultural heritage, not current practice. Commander Thakal stood. Sarah had asked him to attend, knowing his voice would carry weight. "Members of the Council," he said, his deep voice filling the chamber, "I have spent the last week studying human military history. I have reviewed tactics, strategies, and weapons development spanning 3,000 years. As a military commander, I can tell you that humanity's capacity for organized violence is remarkable. Concerning, even." Sarah's heart sank. This wasn't what they'd discussed. But Thakal continued. "However, I can also tell you this. Any species that survived 3 millennia of constant warfare and emerged committed to peace deserves respect, not restriction. The Krovar had 3 brief conflicts before achieving peace. We thought ourselves strong for choosing diplomacy, but we chose it because war was easy to end. For humans, war was constant, normal, expected. Choosing peace meant fighting their own nature every day. That takes a different kind of strength." He looked directly at the Luminary Council member who'd been most vocal about restrictions. "You fear humanity because they preserve weapons. I say that's backwards. Fear the species that forgets its capacity for violence, because those species won't recognize it when it returns. Humans remember, they study their own worst impulses, and they choose differently. That's not threatening." "That's wise." Murmuring spread through the chamber. Sarah saw council members talking among themselves, considering Thakal's words. The Zephyrian speaker called for order. "Dr. Chen, you said understanding human history requires understanding the choice to stop fighting. Explain this choice. Why should we believe it's genuine?" Sarah had been waiting for this question. She pulled up one final set of images. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the devastation of nuclear war. "This is why," she said quietly. "These are cities destroyed by nuclear weapons. In a single attack, each of these bombs killed over 100,000 people. Instantly, thousands more died slowly from radiation." The chamber went silent. Even species familiar with warfare technology looked shaken. "Humans created these weapons," Sarah continued. "We built thousands of them. We pointed them at each other, ready to launch. And then we realized what we'd done. We'd created weapons that could end our entire species. Not in a long war, not over generations, but in an afternoon." She let the images sink in. "That's when we truly chose peace. Not because we'd evolved beyond violence, but because we'd perfected it to the point where one more step would mean extinction. We stepped back from that edge, and we've never forgotten how close we came." "Every human child learns about these weapons," she said. "We teach our history, including the worst parts, especially the worst parts, because forgetting what we're capable of is more dangerous than remembering." A Pleiadian council member spoke up, her voice thoughtful. You preserve weapons to remember the danger they represent? Exactly. The gladius, the katana, the musket, they're all part of the same story. The story of humans learning, slowly and painfully, that cooperation serves us better than conflict. Each weapon represents a choice to fight. Preserving them represents the choice to stop. Vexnall stood from the observation section. I wish to speak, if the council permits. Speaker Crixnall nodded. I have worked with humans for many years, Vexnall said. I have found them to be cooperative, creative, and committed to peaceful exploration. This discovery disturbed me because I thought I understood humanity. But Dr. Chen has shown me that I only understood part of their story. He gestured toward the images still floating in the air. Every species in this chamber has a past. Some of us prefer not to examine it closely, but humans examine everything, especially their own failures. They study their history not to celebrate violence, but to understand it, to prevent it. I believe we should approve Dr. Chen's proposal to turn the weapon cache into an educational site, not to glorify human warfare, but to teach what humanity learned from it. The lessons are valuable, perhaps even necessary. The debate continued for another hour. Species raised concerns, asked questions, challenged Sarah's interpretations. She answered each one, staying calm, staying focused on the core message. Humans chose peace. That choice was meaningful precisely because it went against human nature and human history. Finally, Speaker Crixnall called for a vote. The question was simple. Should humanity face restrictions on colonial expansion and increased monitoring? Sarah watched the voting board. Species after species voted. Some yes, mostly the more peaceful civilizations that couldn't comprehend humanity's violent past, but more voted no. The Krovar voted no. The Ziffer voted no. Even some luminary representatives voted no. When the final count appeared, Sarah felt relief wash over her. The motion failed. No restrictions, no monitoring. Humanity would continue as a full member of the galactic community. Speaker Crixnall announced the results, then added, however, the Council recommends that the Kepler 442b weapon cache be preserved as a heritage site, with educational programming developed to help other species understand human history. Dr. Chen, we trust you'll oversee this project. I will, Sarah said. Thank you. As the council session ended and species began filing out, several aliens approached Sarah. Some wanted to understand more. Others wanted to apologize for their suspicions. A few, like the Khal, wanted to study human warfare history in depth. You did well, Vexnall said, approaching with his characteristic six-limbed gait. I wasn't sure they'd understand. I wasn't sure either, Sarah admitted. But I think we made them see that remembering violence doesn't mean planning for it. Will you really turn the cache into a museum? More than that, an educational center. Aliens can come, learn about human history, understand why we make the choices we make. She smiled. Maybe some species will learn something useful. Maybe understanding conflict helps prevent it. And maybe, Vexnall said thoughtfully, studying human history will help us understand our own species better. You're not the only ones who made difficult choices. Months later, the Human Paradox Museum opened on Kepler 442b. The weapon cache was preserved exactly as it had been found, but now with detailed explanations, historical context, and educational programming. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see the weapons and learn the stories behind them. They learned about Roman discipline, Japanese honor, medieval chivalry, and 100 other aspects of human warrior culture. But more importantly, they learned about the choice to leave all that behind. Sarah served as the museum's curator, working with educators from different species to create programs that translated human history into concepts other civilizations could understand. One day, a young Luminary student approached her during a tour. "Dr. Chen, were humans really that scary?" Sarah smiled and picked up a Gladius from the display. The blade was dark with age, but still perfect, still sharp. She held it out, showing the balance, the design, the purpose behind every aspect of its construction. "We could be," she said honestly. "That's why we chose not to be." The student looked at the blade, then at Sarah. "It must have been hard, choosing peace when you were so good at war." "It was the hardest thing we ever did," Sarah said, "and the most important." She set the Gladius back in its place and noticed something she'd never seen before. A small inscription on the pommel, partially worn away by time. She had to use a magnifier to read it. "Si vis pacem, parabellum." If you want peace, prepare for war. Sarah considered translating it for the student, then decided against it. Some lessons were complicated. Some truths needed time and context to understand. The luminary student wouldn't understand that preparing for war and choosing peace weren't contradictory. That understanding your capacity for violence was the first step toward controlling it. That remembering the worst of your history protected you from repeating it. But maybe someday they would. Maybe that's what the museum was for. Helping species understand each other's complicated truths. "Come on," Sarah said to the student. "Let me show you the medieval section. There's a suit of armor that tells an interesting story about how protection can become a prison." As they walked through the museum, past weapons and armor from 100 different human cultures, Sarah felt something like peace. The cache had been found. The experts had been baffled. But in the end, they'd understood. Humans weren't planning for war. They were remembering it. And in that remembering, they stayed committed to peace. The Gladius remained in its case, dark and silent and patient. Just a piece of metal. Just a remnant of an ancient empire. Just a reminder of what humans had been and what they'd chosen to become. And that choice, Sarah thought, was what made humanity truly human.